Hello and welcome to Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos, we are getting right into it.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I have some bad news, Teos. Today will be the last day that we record Mastering Dungeons. So
Oh
I know this is
man.
probably news to you.
You
And
should have told me. I mean, I'm already suffering from my Duke loss, and you're gonna.
yeah,
This is gone. I mean, what even is the point of life?
I
Let's
know.
see. Where I don't keep any alcohol in the office. It's just
Okay,
gonna be coffee.
I'm gonna have a sip where, oh, I've got to go get my mug. Uh, Here we go.
While Sean's
Cheers
gone, I
to,
hate him. Oh,
yeah.
he's back. Yeah.
And also today's April 1st. So
Oh.
happy
Oh.
April Fool's Day to everyone.
Hmm.
And this will definitely not be our last podcast, as much as that might be a boon to both of us and our various sanities. We are here for the long haul. So if this is your first time listening, welcome
So
to how
sorry.
we, yes, and we apologize ahead of time for anything you are about to
Yeah.
hear. But we are going to get right into it with our listener corner, where we start with Andy Demps, friend of the show and one of our Patreon backers, via the Patreon Discord, asking if you were designing a reference curriculum for adventure design, what adventures would you pick, and what would each one highlight?
Mm.
And I read this question and I thought, okay, this is going to take me 12 hours of research to answer. And then I decided I'm not going to do 12 hours of research on this. So what I will say is the challenge of this question isn't that there aren't great adventures out there, because there are so many and we've reviewed many of them. It's often more instructive to look at the flaws in an adventure to see what it's done well, but then to show the instruction manual nature of an adventure not quite hitting the mark in terms of what the game master needs in order to run the adventure as the adventure expects it to be run, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
often you don't know if an adventure will work until you actually run it. You could read something and say, this is great, I have all the information.
Mhm.
And then as soon as the players start inputting or asking questions, you realize, oh, this adventure leaves a lot out. Uh, what are your thoughts along those lines before I dive into my answers here?
So I like it. I like your concept of needing flaws. I think that's really true. You you know, this question could be, hey, what adventures are the best that showcase how to write adventures? But that might not, as you say, really help
Mhm.
you understand it. And what might actually be better is to look at comparing and contrasting how things do it. Um, and that's what I would probably do is not just choose a flaw, but also some two different approaches, right? And why does it work in this particular place, and why does it work and does it not work this way? Or this one has A and B advantages, this one has C and D advantages, right? And that's where you get into the heart of learning about encounter design, adventure design, rule design, all those kinds of things, is being able to compare and contrast those techniques.
Mhm. Yeah. And so what I thought we would do is go through some adventures that we've learned lessons from
Mm,
to show this. When Teos and I, once upon a time, were reviewing adventures from not just fifth edition days, but going all the way back, as well as adventures from, right, other editions or even other games,
yeah.
we heard time and time again that the Great Modron March was a seminal, awesome, great adventure. And we went into that thinking, okay, let's show what's great about this adventure. And once we actually sat down and read it, we both sat there sort of, I think, individually on our own going, boy, this isn't really good, but I must be missing something because everyone loves this adventure.
Yeah.
And so when we got together to review it, I feel like we were like hesitant to say what was on our minds until we finally both t- were brave enough, I guess, to just say, "Hey, this wasn't. It was a great idea."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe that's why it's so well loved, because everyone loves Modrons, and it's got this multiplanar thing that was new for its time.
Yeah.
But in terms of as a user manual for a DM to run a game, it was not great.
Yeah.
In fact, far from it.
And Dragonlance too, right? It was one where we
Right.
wanted to really be excited. You know, what did the Hickmans cook up? We love their work.
Mhm.
And I had
Yeah.
run that adventure and I remember kind of struggling with it, but I don't remember much more than that. And reading it
Yeah.
was just it was surprising to really go, oh wow, this adventure has some brilliant things it's trying to do and some deep, deep flaws. And so you learn a lot from that.
Yeah. If I had to answer Andy's question, I would say The Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh for me was a good adventure to show how to take a very simple idea
Yeah.
and make it into a way where the game master, whether they're, a really experienced game master or even a new game master, can understand the actual content of the adventure and how to run it in a way that is fun for the players.
Yeah, I find Saltmarsh to be the closest thing to a perfect adventure that is an old adventure
Mhm,
because it will work for almost everybody. And
mhm,
what it's trying to do is not, spectacularly difficult, but it just does it so well, right?
mhm,
Creepy house with a secret. It does that really well. It delivers a D&D experience. It's what you probably want to look at if you're going to design something basic for new players, right? Then this
mhm.
is a great template to follow and look at and see, why does this work so well? Why does it not overextend and fail the way other things do? Yeah.
Yeah. I thought the City of Omu chapter of Tomb of Annihilation and then the actual tomb itself were great in giving DMs a blueprint for a type of adventure where they're sent to a location and there's lots of things happening in the location, but they have a goal, which is find this tomb and enter it.
Yeah.
So the game master, it's a blueprint for a user manual where the game master can do lots of different things, but all of those different options are right there. And while it doesn't necessarily spell out, here's how you run an adventure here, it's pretty obvious that if you want to get involved with all of the different factions and you want to do that, you can do so, or you can just go to the tomb.
Yeah.
And then those opening levels of the tomb, I think, are a great like death trap dungeon.
Yeah.
It may be a little long for
Oh
groups,
yeah.
but at least it gives you that blueprint for how to do it.
Yeah, and I think that gets into that what I was saying of the compare and contrast, right? Like Storm King's Thunder is one where the traps in that adventure I find to be really just like I don't know what they're doing other than just dispensing with damage. And the
Mhm,
experience is sort of like, hey, that happened to you. Okay, I guess it
mhm.
did. I have experienced it. I didn't feel
Yeah.
particularly engaged, but I have taken damage and that felt wrong and that rolling ball flattened me and yeah, that was bad. Whereas if you look at something like Tomb of Annihilation, the traps in that are engaging, right? They are puzzle piece like rooms and devices that make you think, what should I do? Should I pull this lever? Should I walk on the yellow squares or the black squares? Could I
Mhm.
fly? And maybe you can't do any of these things. And that kind of thing that tickles your brain, right? This is a showcase of that kind of design, which builds upon the Tomb of Horrors kind of concept, but in a less
Mhm.
punishing, more interesting way. I
Yeah.
tried to do that kind of design in Dungeon of Doom, right? So I think it's really interesting to compare things like those adventures, Dungeon of Doom, Tomb of Annihilation, to these others that just dish out damage and what is the point of those, right? Um, in a similar fashion, I like to look at. I find that, and I think about this a lot. Icespire Peak,
Mhm.
uh, the town, and how you get these quests. Lost Mines of Fandelver or Lost Mine of Fandelver and how you get quests in that,
Mhm.
or Princes of the Apocalypse Red Larch section.
Mhm.
And they're very different approaches, and you can learn a lot by looking at those three and comparing them. Right, the kind of quest board concept does a great job of sort of pacing. Right,
Yep.
uh, Lost Mine actually really overwhelms you, but it has these really interesting pieces, but it just can be a lot for a DM. And the quests that naturally come out of there aren't particularly engaging. Whereas Red Larch, I think, has some really engaging quests, and it does this really interesting thing where it has kind of keywords that if you are on one or another storyline, there are little bits that the NPCs can tell you, which means that later when you unlock the second storyline, these NPCs can continue to serve a function
Mhm.
because they now have more information, more angles based on where you are. And that's a really neat design, right? So I love comparing those three things.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the same note about Dragons of Icespire Peak,
Mm-hmm.
right? An interesting way for new DMs to learn how to manage a campaign, right? You can do it rather than one long story, you can do it in short bursts that will naturally turn into a longer story. Uh, so, right, those are some things. What other adventures did you think about there?
There's no perfect adventure, and it's interesting. You know, like people really love Strahd, right? Curse of Strahd has
Mhm.
done really well. It's sold really well. It's a fan favorite. But when I try to think of the individual pieces that work well outside of the, say, the Tarokka deck mechanic, or you know, the revolutionary design around the villain that it changed,
Mhm.
you know, I don't know that there are individual parts that really excite me and make me happy the way those and other adventures. If I look at encounter design, I might look at something like Wild Beyond the Witchlight. I think
Mhm.
that those encounters have really good open design, and something Will Doyle and Stacy very good at doing. They
Mhm.
know how to create what I like to call potential energy, right? That the scene is charged up with these things that you just hearing it want to engage with and want to unlock and unleash upon the scene for good or ill, sometimes both. And that's
Mhm.
really fun, right? It just naturally calls you in as a player and makes you want to participate and do things with it. And those are kinds of design that I've tried to do in my work often. I think Cloud Giant's Bargain is one of the ones where I've best done that.
Mhm.
Thinking it deliberately based on those kinds of things. You know, what happens when you walk into the kitchens and all the goblins just stop and look at you in the middle of cooking? You know, what do you do with that when you're trying to sneak into a place, right? Those kinds of things. You walk into a sauna and the fog is so thick that no one can see you, and there's a cloud giant in there, but they're old and they can't see you and they can't quite hear you well. You know, what do you say to this person that says, "Hey, who's there?" Right? That kind of stuff is memorable because of that. And Will and Stacy do that just in droves in Wild Beyond the Witchlight.
Mhm.
So I'd really look at that for encounter design.
There you go. Uh, Thank you for that question. Next question from Alan Tucker via the Patreon Discord. I watched a video from the D20 Play guys and saw Graham Ward and Teos commenting live as well. So here's a question for the show. With MCDM and Daggerheart, along with other games, going to non-initiative systems, why are so many people focused on worrying if players will try to take advantage of it and overwhelm the table? And my answer is it's because so many people will try to take advantage of it and overwhelm the table. Because if you're not careful, there are people out there who will do that. And it's not, I won't say it's not a negative thing. It's not an evil thing, right? They're not doing
Mhm.
it to destroy people's fun. They're doing it because that's how they have fun.
Yeah.
If you've run for more than a dozen people, you have probably come across a player who will tell other people what to do, try to take the spotlight as much as possible, et cetera, et cetera. What a initiative system like D&D does is it gives everyone a chance to act, and
Mhm.
it gives you as the game master that structure to say, okay, Bob, you've done all the talking so far. No, you're not saying this, but you're thinking this. Okay, Bob, you've done everything. You've talked the entire time. Now we're going to go into a system where I can look at someone else and say, what do you do? Okay, great. What do you do? And if Bob, you try to speak, I can
Not your
say,
turn.
Bob, it is not your turn. So it's a tool as a game master.
Mhm.
It's also a tool as a game designer, because if rules are if games are machines, machines are built on structure, and that structure might not be perfect, but at least in that structure, you can start building rules around the structure. So when you want to make a game where an effect will last until the end of a character's next turn, you have a surety that that character's next turn will happen after everyone else goes.
Yeah.
I am not against systems that don't have a step-by-step initiative order. I think there are many fine games that don't use that,
Mhm.
but there is a reason that some games do.
Yeah, and you know, we talked about this a bit on our Patreon Discord. That it's interesting when you get to the initiative systems that like the what's called popcorn initiative. There are other names for it as well, but that idea where in initiative the DM says, okay, the GM says that this person has sort of really initiated combat, so they're going to go first, and after they're done, that person, whether GM or a player, will pick who goes next. And this becomes, in theory, what it should do is just go with what's natural, right? So if my character went and I, shot at the vampire, and then I think my other buddy probably would go next because we're both, on the same page. And then that person will say, well, I think that I'm in a position where now the monster would go. And that's kind of, I think, what's sort of in the mentality. But what really ends up happening is the players, after a while of using the system, usually devolve into the, well, one of us gets to go now. We should all go. Except if we all go, then the monsters will go. And then the next round will kick in. And for round 2, all the monsters will choose themselves again, because that's optimal. Under focus fire rules, right? And deal damage, take things down now kind of mentality, tactics. That's what's going to happen. And so what usually ends up happening is most players go, they keep a couple in reserve, they let a couple monsters go, and then the players get to go at the start of the next turn. And it creates a sort of player heavy structure, which is not bad for some games. Some games where the players should be very powerful, it works great, but it sort of devolves into that. Apocalypse World tries to really say, like, look, what initiative? It's just, what does it make sense? Talk when it's your turn, and when the GM thinks the monsters would respond, that's when they respond, and we're not gonna worry about this. And the downside, as you said, is that, well, Bob might really dominate things, and Bob might try to go 3 times in a row. Or if you watch Acquisitions Incorporated, Viari will swing from the chandelier, run across the thing, pick up the blah blah blah, flip the lever, attack twice, run back across, and so on and so forth. And that's amusing for a show, but not great if you're the other players at the table, as we see watching Acquisitions Incorporated, where the others go, what the hell is happening? Can I take 40 turns too? And so that's the downside of it, right? And why we end up, I think, talking about this.
Yeah. And if you take Rob Schwalb's Shadow of the Demon Lord type system, right, which is, all right, those who do fast turns, you go first. Fast turn being, right, you don't move or certain actions. All right, everyone who's fast turn went. Now the monsters fast turns. Okay, monsters went. Anyone with slow turns. Okay, now monster slow turns. So it's part, does it work for the story? It's part, does it work for the game? It's part, does it work for your group? And it's, part, what is best for making this transition between the story and the action as smooth as possible. So
and I think that with Daggerheart, I think part of what's getting into the conversation there, in addition to just its critical role, and so it's popular to think about it and talk about it, and analyze it and or knock it down, depending on what kind of people you are. It's that Daggerheart wants to be a narrative game, but has a lot of crunch. If it were more of a narrative game, then who goes is less important. But the more tactical stuff your character has, the more that initiative turn matters, right? You're not just doing a thing for story purposes. You can set things up for other players. You can do the area burst 5 that gets all things, but only if I go now. And hey, if I go again, I can do this thing, right? And that's where you end up in I might want to go 3 times in a row because I am the best person right now. And, in some movie scenes, that's great. In some novels, but generally not great at the table. You want to just say, I know it would be optimal if you went 3 times, but this is a team game and we want you to swap it up a bit more. So I think that's where with Daggerheart's design in particular, it gets talked about from those folks who are having a little more intelligent discourse about it, because it has that tactical angle to it that makes you want to go now versus later. And that can be dominating in play. So it is problematic at times, varying by table.
Sure. And finally, via YouTube, we get this from Matthew Snow. I'm looking forward to GMing for the first time. Awesome. Good luck with that. One of my players is a big fan of the disadvantage systems from GURPS, since it provides a mechanical reward for choosing a drawback which he has to play or which may come back to bite him. He and I both feel that 5e's implementation of the DM inspiration for role-playing flaws may not be an adequately distinct benefit from all other sources of advantage in 5e. I'd considered a guaranteed critical to be used next session as a possible substitute. However, I can foresee that might be disruptive if it shuts down role-playing encounters or combat, which the rest of the group want to engage with. How would you go about designing a replacement for flaws in 5e? What kinds of mechanical incentives would you recommend to keep players engaging with it regularly? What considerations and pitfalls should we take into account when attempting to alter that system? Any thoughts you have would be greatly appreciated. This is a huge question, Matthew Snow. And so let's first of all explain what the GURPS disadvantage system is. In GURPS, you build your character. I haven't played GURPS in like 30 years, so bear with me. You build your character based on a certain number of points that you can spend to get traits that are beneficial to you. The system also allows you to take negative traits, take flaws that give you back points that you can spend for more positive things. If that's a very succinct way of saying that. What my experience is with systems like this is it brings out the very worst of the min-maxers.
Yeah.
Who will search for flaws that they can either ignore or that aren't really flaws, that really don't affect play much, to get the extra points that they can put into things that affect things very, very much.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So in Shadowrun, I have had countless characters who had an allergy to some metal, aluminum, gold, whatever. And you can choose mild or severe or whatever and take points for this. Then you get benefits out of it, right? In all of my play, I have had an allergy situation once across years and dozens of characters. It's just free points. And everybody playing the game knows that. And it's the worst. And Legend of the Five Rings has similar things, right? You know, like, oh, I'm opinionated. Oh, yeah, that has role-playing implications. But now I get to do ridiculous damage with my katana, right? Like, it is problematic because you can't help. And I try to be a good player, but I can't help. And most people can't help themselves. But to make these kinds of decisions where the flaw is forgotten, the advantage is omnipresent. And that's the problem with these systems, right? Because what you ideally want is you want that the player wants to lean into the flaw. These kinds of systems tend not to do that, right? And Shawn, you and I have talked about systems that do encourage you to lean into the flaws. Fate, right? With the aspects, right? You get a benefit for playing to your flaw, but it's not a broken benefit. It's a scene benefit. And the reason you're doing it is because you're believing in the role playing of it and the characterization part of it, not on the you're not doing it just for the benefit, right?
Yeah. So bringing up fate here is important because I think this idea in 5e of traits, ideals, personality trait, ideals, bonds, and flaws that are somehow tied to inspiration. And I think they took this, they being the designers of 5e, took it from games like Fate or games like it. And to explain this in just a touch more detail, in Fate, you give your character aspects, which are short phrases that are a truth about your character. So you may be your primary trait might be, the greatest swordsman in the valley. That's your main trait. Then a trouble trait, they call it, is something that gets your character into trouble. It could be hot-headed, as Teos said. It could be wanted by the drug cartel, right? Something that and now you don't get any points. There's no points in this. These are just truths about your character that you create. Then during play, you have fate tokens or fate points. When you tap an aspect, when you say, this aspect is going to come into play, you give the game master a fate point, and then you get a bonus to your roll, or you get to re-roll, or something beneficial. However, you or the game master can also use those aspects against you if it's part of the story. Okay, you're in a negotiation right now, and if this negotiation goes well, you will win access to this thing that you want. However, you're hot-headed. So I'm going to say you fail at this. right? Or things are going to go very poorly for you in this because you are hot-headed. The narrative goes against you, but I'm going to give you back a fate token, a fate point that you will then be able to
Use
use
in the future. Yeah.
use in the future. So there's this transaction thing. It's not all at once at the beginning. It's a part of the gameplay. And
Yeah.
I think that's what these aspects, traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws for D&D wanted to do, but they didn't spell it out,
No.
right?
Yeah. And D&D has too many. And we talked about this during our player's handbook review, but it has so many things that nobody can remember them, even for their own character, let alone that the DM or the players can remember it for the other players, right? My flaw,
Right.
my bond, my ideal, my two personality traits. That's too much.
Mhm.
Whereas Fate has just a couple of things and it makes them very iconic. And so, going back to the question, especially for your, I mean, well, you can look at it two ways. One is it's your first time DMing, do whatever you want, learn from it,
Yeah,
have fun.
that's true.
Perfectly fine to operate that way. The other is, hey, it's your first time. Starting on a standard footing may be best, to where you can see the game a little more, feel a little more comfortable about it, and then see what kind of things you want to customize. Specifically on this area of sort of flaw type pieces, this may work fine for you, but it probably, for most players, they're not going to lean into the disincentive part of it. They're going to lean into the power part of it. And 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 it may not create the role playing that you want, because it ends up being really mechanical and feeling mechanical. And the real tough part, as 5e found out, is trying to say to the player, hey, here are the parts. Remember, these are the parts that you want to lean into story wise, so that is becomes part of the fluency of the game, right? Of the normal construct of play. And that tends to not happen when it's too complicated. It needs to be really iconic. Fate does that well by just saying, like, you just know, like, hot-headed. Like, I can remember the things from a lot of my Fate characters because they're just a couple and they're clear, iconic. Or even better, 13th Age with its one unique thing. It's such a simple thing to just say, this is the guiding principle of my character. And everything can come off of that because you just feel it. You know that that's your character. The more that you can get into that angle, the more that players will do those things. And so I would look to see how I could make these sort of more aspect-like, more clear, iconic things about the characters that everybody's going to absolutely know and remember. That's where you'll find your best play coming off of that.
Yeah. And to the inspiration system is very simple. And it does work if you decide ahead of time how it is going to work. If you say, if you role play your character well and it leads to a detrimental outcome because you do, here's inspiration. You can then use it later to re-roll. And there you go. That's it. That's the system. That's about as simple as you can make it without getting into points or any other chips or things that you pass back and forth like fate. Uh, I wouldn't go, as Teo said, I wouldn't go any further than that. I wouldn't, if this is your first time GMing, GM, right? Don't worry about that. Everybody have fun, role play to your heart's content. If players are doing things that their character would do and they're all happy with it and it tells a good story, then just go more gently on them later. If they put themselves into a horrible position, help them find a way out of that because they are telling a story, understanding the flaws of their characters.
And that's maybe one last thing to very quickly touch on, which is that when you lean into flaws too much, one of the problems, if everybody's not on board, is if I do my hot-headed where I'm going to wreck the encounter. And the other players will not enjoy that. And we're all pretending we're kind of actors, if that makes sense. And this is what my character would do, right? But at some point, we're also in the shared experience of trying to accomplish goals. And I shouldn't just take my essence and wreck a scene, right? I might complicate a scene, and there's a real difference there. And so one of the questions that a lot of the advice that we often provide on the show is for folks, it sort of assumes that the players are at the sort of the same level of experience, but they may not know how to handle these things. And so you have to tease out, where are my players, right? What are my players? How are they going to respond to these systems that I'm creating? because they may respond really well because they get it, or they may not get it and they may just say, well, this is what my character would do. I've got this flaw, so sorry everybody, I am attacking the king.
Right. Exactly. Yep. So 3 great questions this week. Thank you all very much. At the end of the show, we'll tell you how you can reach out and ask us a question. But let's get into our news and commentary section right now, starting with a Kickstarter that is including D&D Beyond integration in it. This is the Monsters of Drakkenheim Kickstarter coming from the Dungeon Dudes and Ghostfire Gaming. If you ever imagined this would happen, mark this off, mark all 25 squares on your bingo card, because this is different. So what this Kickstarter allows you to do is certain tiers will have virtual tabletop support. So if you choose that part, that tier that includes it, or if you get an add-on where you purchase that VTT support, at the end of the Kickstarter, you will be able to choose which VTT you want to get this content through. And we've seen this before, right? Well, we have Roll20 support. We have Fantasy Ground support. We have other VTT support. This is the first time that you are seeing you will get D&D Beyond support for this content, which means that Ghostfire Gaming had to sit down with D&D Beyond and Wizards of the Coast to work all of this out ahead of time. It's just one more step in the opening up of D&D Beyond and Wizards of the Coast to third-party content. So all this talk of a walled garden is the walls of this garden, if you even believed it in the first place, are disintegrating rapidly.
I did, Shawn. I'll tell you that I believed in the walled garden for the simple purpose or reason of it's hard technologically to monitor all these things, right? And I've said this before, but if I look at my D&D Beyond screen and the list of sources, and you end up with all these, Tsojcanth takes up a slot, and the Dungeon Dudes and the Kobold Press and everything, and suddenly it becomes really hard to find all the products. And you have to code for all of this in the D&D Beyond system, and DMs have to deal with the oh, I took a Mark of Eberron and a Drakkenheim, blah, 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 and a do. And the DM's like, what is all this stuff? I just wanted you to choose stuff from the player's handbook. Yeah, well, we don't know what's from what. Deal.
Yeah.
Right? Like, for all those reasons and other technical reasons, like people being busy, I didn't think that they would open it this wide. Now that I see it this wide, I think to myself, wow, there are so few barriers to this wall, at least around major players, that I wonder what else is being planned, because this is so substantial an undertaking. Like the kind of discussions to say, hey, we're going to have the Kickstarter and it's going to release this list of backers and we're going to give it to you and you're going to do this. Like, that's such a dedication of resources that I think, well, there's a lot that could happen more beyond this. And so I'm very eager, very interested to see what comes in the future, because this is pretty darn fascinating and well beyond what I would have expected.
Yep. And to be clear, I am a contractor for Ghostfire. I am not directly involved in the planning of this Kickstarter. I may come in at the end to help out with some game design stuff, editing, that sort of thing. But I don't know any behind the scenes knowledge of this. And I was as surprised as anyone when I saw the that virtual tabletop aspect of it up there.
Yeah, though you and I are good at compartmentalizing, right? This yesterday was the anniversary of the D&D movie, and it made me remember. And by chance, I was putting up a poster of the movie on my wall, and it made me remember that, for many months I sat with the knowledge of the D&D script, and you and I had many conversations. You would say things like, "I wonder if this movie is going to be any good," and I'd be like, "Yeah, it's on everybody's mind." And I didn't say I know the answer. I've read the script, because for a project I had read the script. But right. I think you and I are good at compartmentalizing, and I think folks who watch the show a lot know that. We're able to sequester that part of our brain that knows some business reality or whatever, and the part that says, well, what would I think if I didn't know that? Well, here's what I would think.
Yeah. Here's what I think. Right. And so that Kickstarter's up. It's been out there for about 5 days now as of this recording. It's already up over 670,000 after that week. It could hit 1 million. That's been very rare. It used to,
Yeah.
for a while back in the 2000, 2019, 2020, 2021, like it seemed like every day there was a new $1 million RPG Kickstarter.
I mean,
And
not
now
quite,
it's,
but yeah, and I think that the particularly interesting part is there are many more big Kickstarters now in terms of like that would have hit 1 million, and so
yeah.
that may be part of it. In addition to just post pandemic type reality, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It used to it felt that way, right? And now it's harder. It's a harder thing to hit
Yeah.
big numbers.
It slowed down a bit. So you can find a link to that Kickstarter, The Monsters of Drakkenheim, in our show notes. And speaking of prices and quality and the direction of the hobby, we have two stories. The first from Gary Con, where it was said that the core book prices would remain the same as they were in 2014. Teos, what do you have to cover on
Yeah,
that?
yeah. In a seminar, this was mentioned. So we'll see. It's kind of not super confirmed. Just it was a thing said at the seminar by D&D staff. So that is really interesting because the core book prices come from 2014. They were very reasonable back then for all the value that the books offer, and so keeping them at this level when Wizards has said, "Oh, our prices of shipping, printing, everything have gone up," well, then Wizards is taking a hit on that profit because they want the purchase of these books to be more compelling, and that's just interesting. So that's all we know at this time. But if it is that case, then that's very interesting, right? They're trying to make those books as attractive as possible to you.
Yep. And one of the reasons might be our next bit of news, which is the ICV2 reports on D&D being down, uh, but the hobby in general is up due to miniatures.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead. Go ahead with this. You're better at this than
Yeah,
I.
I mean, ICV2 is always interesting. They have limited windows into everything. They reach out to certain stores, certain distributors, and kind of build data based off of that and extrapolate. They've been wrong in the past, but they're often right. And this corroborates with kind of the analysis we've done on our Discord and that I've blogged about, where we looked and said, probably D&D is down a fair bit. So ICV2 says all of the hobby games market is up 1%. That's less than inflation. And the whole reason for that growth is miniatures and collectible games doing well. So that's your Warhammer, your Magic, Pokemon, collectible miniatures, that kind of thing, right? WizKids blind boxes. When you get to all the other forms are down. Now, it isn't necessarily terrible. It's kind of like when we talked about Kickstarter many shows ago. Down to what, right, is what I always like to ask. And we are at sort of record highs for the industry. So going down from those record highs, you're still in really solid ground. The market, they say, has grown 70% the past 3 years. So being up 1%, not the end of the world. Miniature games grew about 9%. That's a total of 575 million. Games Workshop was around 15% for the year increase. So, clearly they're doing well. And their problem is apparently getting enough supply. There's a line about WizKids miniatures cooling in demand, but this isn't a part that maybe what they're talking about is the Nolzur's line, which is still the number 2 in non-collectible miniatures. But whether that includes the blind boxes and stuff, I'm not clear on how wide that statement was about the demand cooling for WizKids. Collectible games were up around 3%. Board games, card games, RPG sales all down. They did say that consumption increases, and I love the quote, "The American consumer is a tough beast to bring down." Yeah.
Yeah.
Publishers continue to publish faster, shortening development and manufacturing, and one could maybe say perhaps overwhelming the market at times. Store traffic is reportedly back to pre-COVID levels or above, but costs are higher, especially labor and rent. Store counts are about flat to maybe a little bit up, the number of stores. Sales are up around 2%, 15th consecutive year of growth for stores. But they predict next year will be down. And Ian World has a pro subscription to ICV2. They report that D&D is said to be down 30% in hobby stores. Take that number with a grain of salt, given ICV2's history, but it is likely that stores have slowed a fair bit overall. They say that the OGL crisis impacted some lifestyle longtime gamers, but newer players as a whole seem largely oblivious to the situation, and that the move to digital has impacted sales. So, we shared in our show notes a graph of what the hobby games market is. So even if we drop a fair bit, we'll still be way above 2019, which we all said was a perfectly wonderful year. So not a bad place to be. But we know how companies are. They always want endless growth. And in that sense, that's a tough thing to deal with.
Yeah. Yep. If growth is incredible and then growth is minuscule, you take that as being down when it's actually pretty good growth. So hang in there for that. We will continue to keep an eye on trends like that, especially going into 2024, the new books, and then into 2025 to see what sales are like there. You want a free adventure? We got you. You want 2 free adventures? We got you twice. You can download Descent into the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth for free. The supplement is part of a year-long celebration of D&D and its 50th anniversary. This is an abridged quick play version of the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth, which will appear in a 5e form in the Quests from the Infinite Staircase. So this particular adventure, which is free on D&D Beyond, is for 4 to 6 characters of 9th level. This is a revised version of the AD&D adventure where monsters have been updated. The text has been, Teos is holding it up right now. The text has been rewritten. And Teos, what do you feel about the classic adventures being redone?
I mean, so one thing is, man, like the old map. I love seeing the new version of this map. It looks so wonderful. I actually like monsters or adventures being revised, right? So when I look at this text, I go, hey, I already have this text. I have it in various formats. Sometimes it's been, republished or whatever. We've advanced a lot as a hobby. So make this experience even better. As good as the original is, make it better. And they have done that, or at least they've attempted to do that. This is not like some of the earlier anthologies where they just sort of largely reprinted things and just, modified the monster to be a CR pick. Here they've made the changes. Like the big wall of text is rewritten to be short and concise. They've simplified encounters. They've changed out what monster it is. They didn't customize the monster. They give you a different one and that kind of thing. I think that's good. I think that's largely a decent use of a designer's time to update this for today's era and make it a better adventure. Yeah, it won't be the classic in terms of that absolute experience, but I think that's okay. I don't think people really need that. If you want the classic, grab the classic and do the customizing, the updating the monsters yourself. But in general, I think that's great. That's what I'm paying for, is for the staff to update things to the best. Do you agree? Do you want the classic to be more true?
No, I'm with you. I've seen the classic already. I, like you, probably have a copy. I could buy a copy for quite cheap on D&D Beyond, I'm sure. So I want this to be something that I can use right now with 5e rules. It's like we talked about at the start of the show, right? Making the adventure playable with the rules that you have. I'd love to look at what Dan Dillon and Justice Armand did to this to make it playable in this edition. I believe there are also pre-generated characters that can go with it, and it has tournament scoring.
Yeah.
So if you want to play it through to see how well you score, maybe game master it for 2 different groups, and you can have a little competition. There are rules in there for that. The second, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say D20 Play we've mentioned a couple times, and you can, I think this Thursday, so the day after this drops, you could sign up to play with Tom Christie, who's running through Start Playing Games.
There you go. The second adventure is one that we just learned about being available, although we've talked about it before, is the Lego adventure. How did you get an early copy of this, Teos?
I signed up as a Lego insider, and you sign up and create an account on the Lego thing. You find finally, after much searching, the Lego insider page, and then you go to redeem points. And when you go to redeem, there'll be a 0-point D&D adventure, and you can download the PDF now without waiting for it to come out. And it's interesting. The adventure is a sort of simple, like, how do we work around this Lego structure and have an adventure? If I understand correctly, it was written by Kyle Brink.
No, it was
Um,
Chris Perkins wrote it.
oh, Chris Perkins.
Kyle's the
Oh, he's the
yeah,
product lead. He led the
yeah, yeah,
product. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yep.
Chris Perkins wrote the adventure. Janica Carter edited. Um, so there are a couple things, right? It's for 5th level characters.
Mhm.
And probably everybody goes, well, how's that even possible? It's like, well, because you have a red dragon in it. So darn, we got to make it harder.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
huge red dragon, right? And there's displacer beasts, and there are, all kinds of other critters that are classic monsters. And this is one of the problems with D&D. When you want those classic monsters in it, well, level 1 is
mhm,
a little hard to do.
yep,
Though they probably could have done it. I can think of ways to do it, but they didn't. They went for 5th level characters. And very interestingly, they have the characters in there, but then they also have a 1-page version of rules to non D&D run it, and it's literally
right,
things like make a coin flip to see if you were hit, and
yeah,
other bits like that. And I thought that was very interesting that they kind of chose to do it that way. Last bit, I'll shut up.
yeah.
They didn't mention or link to the D&D basic rules, and I find that just fascinating.
Mhm. Yeah, there are pre-generated characters, simplified character sheets. So if you want to play it with your own characters, you can. If you want to use these simplified, not as simplified as we did for Peril and Pinebrook, but still simplified character sheets, you can find those in the product. Or as Teos said, there is a way to run it as its very own game. If you get hit, rather than taking damage, you fall down. And if you fall down, you can't do anything until you stand back up. And if you stand back up, that's your turn. And if you get knocked down 3 times, your character is out of the combat for the entire rest of the encounter. And if everybody gets knocked down 3 times, then you have failed in your mission. And there are also ways to remove pieces from your Lego minifig. And if you remove pieces from your Lego minifig, you can no longer use that piece that you have removed. So you have certain objects. So if you remove your Warhammer, you can no longer use your Warhammer. So it's a really neat way to play with Legos, play a D&D like game without actually getting into those D&D rules. So I thought that was
Yeah,
very clever, and I enjoy it. I'm
I do
almost
like that.
tempted to play it that way.
Yeah, the losing your piece of equipment when you fail save is
Yeah,
neat. I would have liked a few more things like that, right? Something in the adventure that, well, stick this to the character's head, the minifig's
yeah,
head, or
right.
yeah, I don't know, put this under their feet because they're on fire or something. That would have been really a lot of fun if that could have been worked in. But you know how it is
Yeah.
with these projects. It's hard to design. You never know when the design comes in versus all the other pieces.
Yeah, it's amazing that any of these projects actually get through to completion. So we will take joy in the fact that it's there. And hey, DMs, game masters, you love minis, or you love Legos. Sorry. In America, we say Legos, but I have been told by a reputed source that it's actually Lego. So
Mm.
you love Lego. You love playing with all the Lego. So just make it up as you go. Add Thor's hammer. Add
Yeah.
a lightsaber. Use all those wonderful pieces of Lego that you have
Mhm.
to enhance this story.